Welcome back. In this video, I'm going to talk about the analog model. The first question is, of course, why on earth do we call it analog model? Well, the answer is very simple. Many critics and film theorists started to use Freud's work on dreams as kind of an analog to how we watch films. The reason behind this is very simple. When we sleep, we basically see the dreams unfolding on a kind of a screen in front of our eyes, except that we are asleep, of course. Now, when you go to the cinema, we rarely do that, but still. If you go to the cinema, you sit in the auditorium, which is darkened, and then they play a film in front of you, and you cannot help but look at it, watch it till the end, and, well, get through the film. Just like with dreams, you can't stop unless you wake up. So these theorists and critics started to use tools from dream analysis as created by Freud himself to analyze films and filmic sequences. The two basic figures taken over from Freud and Freud's dream analysis are condensation and displacement. Condensation is when several attributes of different persons, different characters are pushed into one, condensed into one phenomenon or character. This is what Lacan translates as the rhetorical figure of metaphor. Displacement, however, offers something completely different. Here, one attribute is substituted for another attribute of potentially another character. Lacan identifies this kind of figure in the rhetorical figure of the metonymy. In other words, dream analysis can be translated into a kind of rhetorical analysis in terms of film. Film is an illusion. It's about the oscillation of presence and absence. And this game gives you kind of a whole diegetic world that may unfold in front of your eyes. It also means that once it shows you something, it also hides you the other half of that diegetic realm. This is what we call the 180-degree representational rule. That is, if you see something on the screen which causes visual pleasure, it is always already marked by a kind of a lack, the lack of the other half of the 180 degree. It shows something while hiding something else. Think of filmic representation in these terms. You have 180 degrees in front of you, but if we are talking about a filmic reality, where's the other half of that representation? Where is the other half of narrative space that is built up around the camera? Looking at 180 degrees space of the full narrative space might give you some visual pleasure momentarily, but then it is also marked by lack. Yes, the lack of the other half of the narrative space. Given this controversy with two-dimensional flat representation of a whole three-dimensional space, Metz was interested in why do we buy it? In other words, how do we spectators experience filmic reality as real? To get to a conclusion, he compared the spaces of theater and that of film. He examines the differences in the ways of representation and in the ways of the represented reality. He concludes that the impression of reality is more convincing and more stable with film because with theater, what is represented is obviously a fiction. But the way of representation, because we occupy the very same space that the actors and the props and the stage and the machinery and others in the audience occupy, the representation itself is real. So there's a break between the way of representation and the represented material. However, with film, we do not have this break within representational dynamics because in film what is represented is obviously fictional, but the way of representation is also fictional. It's not there, it's just an illusion. As there's no break in the represented material and the way of representation in terms of fictionality, we tend to believe that the reality that film presents is real. As there's no significant break between representation and what is represented in terms of film, the impression of reality is way stronger than in any other type of entertainment. This creates an imaginary belief that what we see is true, it is real. Now, there are two scenarios to explain how it really works in psychoanalytical terms. One is fetishism, and the other is the story of the mirror stage. In a nutshell, fetishism as a representational logic works like this. Take two contradictory beliefs, like I know this is just fiction and I know this is just real, and then put the two together and say, I know that this is a piece of fiction, yet I continue to believe that what I see is real, it's reality. Once you go through these steps, you will accept the filmic world as a world that may be reality. For the duration of the movie, definitely it is going to be your reality. With the mirror stage, the child who stands in front of the mirror experiences his body as not complete, as something that cannot really be controlled fully. Yet the image that he or she sees in the mirror is perfect. So what does he or she do? Well, identifies with that image. This way, this misrecognizing myself in the image of the other, serves as the basis for a true and stable identification model that can be utilized in terms of the cinema, where also we need to identify with the image of someone else. What the identification with the image entails first and foremost is the identification with the look of the camera in filmic terms. This is what we call, after Matt's, primary cinematic identification. Once the spectating subject is within the filmic realm, filmic reality, it starts to identify with a character's point of view that is given. Remember, focalization. This is called secondary cinematic identification. Surprise! These two levels of cinematic identification make sure that the spectator is secure and the impression of reality is strong enough to go through the film. So far, I've been talking about looks, the look of the camera, the look of the character that we need to identify with. But remember, we always only see one side of the reality in the filmic narrative space. So we need to talk about that absent part as well, which actually makes sure that the look, the presence of the look, is possible for us. Here we introduce the term the gaze. To understand the difference between the look and the gaze, think of a situation like you're sitting in the library, social distancing, the library is closed anyway. So you're reading, but while reading and being immersed in what you are reading, you feel that somebody is looking at you, and you lift your look, you start to look around, but you don't see anyone there. Now, that absent position, which had an effect on you, the effect of being looked at, is what we call the gaze. Okay, let's see how the oscillation of absence and presence, of the look and the gaze, organize filmic reality. You have a shot of Clint Eastwood, for example, looking at something or looking into the camera. Then you have a cut and you have another shot which presents something, an object or the vista in a Western movie. And then we come back to the original image, Clint Eastwood looking at something or someone. This actually is the basic operation of what we call suture. The first image of Clint Eastwood creates visual pleasure because finally you see something and someone on the screen. But like I said earlier, it is also marked by lack. To make up for this lack, we have the second image, and it also causes visual pleasure because it substitutes something for the lack of something. And while there's visual pleasure again, it is also inherently marked by lack, the lack of the other part of the narrative space. So we have the third image. This causes visual pleasure, but as you know, it is always already marked by lack. So it goes on and on and on and on. Why is it the basic operation of filmic editing? Well, because imagine a cloth and imagine a needle that goes through the cloth and then comes back and then goes and does this. Basically, this is the operation to suture. This is the operation how the spectator is sewn into the movie's texture or text. This is how cinematic editing secures the identification levels for the spectator. Alright, so much about psychoanalytic film theories. I've covered all the 5 big approaches. Next time we jump into something completely different. See you then. Stay safe and healthy.